this is a big problem with capitalism. We effectively live in a post-scarcity world that is enforcing artificial scarcity, and that becomes unsustainable for a large portion of humanity. So
are you saying the apartments in which they've been losing money because they haven't had any tenants because they kicked them out? You're saying that's not sustainable?
Absolutely unsustainable.
Yeah. Okay. Unsustainable growth. One of the elegant ways I've heard it put is that if you allow an organism unchecked growth, eventually it dies in its own waste. Mm-hmm. That it's an unsustainable system. And if you just look at companies and you just run little models where, doesn't matter what they're making, if they're trying for continual growth, it kills them.
I think we can look at what's happening in Texas right now or what was happening a few weeks ago is a perfect example of this. I did a video on it recently and basically went into how if you look at ERCOT, the main provider for Texas energy grid, the way they have it set up is that essentially they are able to take this small amount of power and say, okay, this is the maximum output we have. There's nothing they can do beyond that. So if there's a need for more power than what they're willing to supply, there are blackouts that are caused. But it's not because there's a lack of power supply, it's because they place these artificial limits on how much people can use. And like the consequences we saw were there were people who were dying in their own homes because their oxygen equipment wasn't working, because they literally froze to death. There were water mains bursting, people who still currently don't have power or clean running water. This one decision to cap the power supply in one place has all of these cascading effects. And it's one thing that Mao talked about the contradictions of capitalism, where as you start reaching more of late stage capitalism, you see the sharpening and the increasing of these contradictions. So what you'll see is like sort of the two groups in society. You have the people who actually control the power, they're the ones who control the wealth, and you have the rest of the people. The people in power are pulling more and more of that power away to the point where they're essentially the ones who dictate whether or not the lights stay on or not. So it's this very tiny group of people who is dictating this to, and like everyone else, millions upon millions upon millions of people. And it's all in the drive to continue producing more profit. And the thing about companies and corporations is if they want to increase their profits, they will take whatever measure they feel necessary to increase those profits. So, yeah. You know, this time we saw the power companies cut power off for millions of customers for weeks on end. Who's to say something worse might not happen the next time there is a historic storm like this?
It helps here in Buffalo that we have that our power grid was essentially designed and it's expandable over 100 years ago when public utility meant public utility, because you know, Nikola Tesla basically designed one of the things. So we're almost entirely hydro from the Niagara Falls. You may have heard of it. Hydro, nuclear, and wind power. All of which we have, you know, we have wind in abundance. So our electric bill.
Yeah, I saw
so fucking tiny. It's astonishing. And I hear about other people's electric, and I just go, why don't you do something about this? You have the capacity there.
In Texas, the problem was the dual thing. The state allowed the power company to use a billing practice that sounds kind of reasonable, but has a deep flaw with it. And they combined that with deciding to cut themselves off from the rest of the nation's power grid so that they could deregulate in the idea of allowing the invisible hand of the market to control the regulation. But why would the power company invest money to winterize their facilities so they'll operate in cold weather, when all that does is insulate them from greater profit. That they made in a couple of days a year's worth of profit because they couldn't make any power. And those they were supplying with were paying, they could charge 50 times the going rate. Part of the invisible hand of the market and all that is a social thing that used to be much more prevalent. In Gone with the Wind, Rhett Butler was doing everything he could to make sure that his child would be accepted in polite society, because he had gotten his money by the dirty, old-fashioned way of earning it.
Well, no.
And
slavery.
The
dirty, old-fashioned way of slavery.
That wasn't Rhett Butler.
Earned it.
That wasn't Rhett. That was Scarlett.
Oh,
yeah, Scarlett
okay.
did the slavery.
Okay.
He was a gun runner during the war.
Oh, okay.
And a hero during the war, and therefore, then
okay, so he actually put some amount of effort, but I mean, also for
so the point is that the point is that he was trying to do that, and then later we had Joseph Kennedy, who he made his fortune as a criminal. He was a bootlegger, and that's where the Kennedys' money came from. And he was determined that that one of his kids could be president, that they were not going to be excluded from that. And I think that that's a progress. I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, but like, people shouldn't have to get rich through a bootleg campaign so that their children have a chance at being the president. That's not how society
he wasn't trying to make
work.
it so his children would be the president. He just earned his money in a socially unacceptable way. He then managed to go straight.
That's almost the only way to make any significant amount of money.
How else are you going to become rich like the Kennedys? Yeah, no kidding. But
yeah, that's a big problem, though. Like, every person you've heard that pulled themselves up from their bootstraps, chances are they had rich relatives pulling them up.
Bill Gates was a criminal. He engaged heavily in
he also
unfair business practices that were illegal, and he continually just went, I'll suffer the lawsuits, and I'll fight you in court, and I'll spend more money than you will. And
yeah, well, I mean, he also had rich parents too.
But yes,
important detail.
Like,
yeah, no,
they're just he did this from he quit college and did this all from his backyard. He also had his parents pay for college, so there wasn't really a debt, if I recall correctly. And it's definitely something where there are so many more resources if you're financially well off. I mean, that's same with the General Motors person as well.
Well, I've stirred the hornet's nest enough with that first point. I want to get to something about, it's my what I consider to be my libertarian reasoning and background that leads me to these things, okay? That if
look,
you
I'm
look
fine
at all
with
the
you
practical
stirring the
studies,
hornet's nest. It's always fun to play with hornets, okay?